It's NFL schedule release day, and it's supposedly happening tonight, Wednesday night. But stuff like this always leaks. Things like this can never stay quiet because there's too many people in the know. There's too many people that have access to this information, and somebody is going to leak it. And that is exactly what happens for every single NFL team. So I found the leaked Minnesota Vikings schedule posted to X or Twitter by at Vikes Insider. And here's the Minnesota Vikings schedule. Week 1 at the Giants. Week 2 home versus the 49ers. Week 3 home versus the Texans. Week 4 at Green Bay. Week 5 versus the Jets in London. Week 6 is a bye week. Week 7 is home versus the Lions. Week 8 is at the Rams. Week 9 is home versus the Colts. Week 10 is at the Jaguars. Week 11 is at the Titans. Week 12 is at the Bears. Week 13 is versus the Cardinals. Week 14 is versus the Falcons. Week 15 is versus the Bears at home. Week 16 is at the Seahawks. What a shocker there. We never play them at home, do we? And then week 17 is versus the Packers at home. And we finish off the regular season in week 18 on the road against the Detroit Lions. So a couple of quick takeaways from this schedule, my first reaction. And by the way, this is presented by Hoagland Farm. Call Jared at 952-491-1541 for the best rotationally grazed 100% grass-fed beef and get 20% off your first order by mentioning the Minnesota Tim podcast. 952-491-1541. 952-491-1541. Okay, so my quick hitting reactions to this leaked NFL Minnesota Vikings schedule. My first reaction is the bye week is in week 6. That's pretty early on in the NFL schedule, which could be a major disadvantage to those people that want to see J.J. McCarthy early on in the NFL season. You know, what's perfect is when you have a rookie quarterback and you can start them right after the bye week. That happens in week 10 or week 11 or maybe week 9 even. You know, you have a couple more weeks to get them ready. Then you have a long bye week. You got a break to get them even more ready. And then you start them for the second half of the season. Well, if J.J. McCarthy is going to start this year, it will likely happen after week 6, in my opinion. Sam Darnold is going to be the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. That's my take. That's been my opinion, and that will be my opinion all offseason, regardless of what other people think, regardless of speculation and the fieriness that comes with any rookie quarterback that's selected by an NFL team. So that's my first reaction. My second reaction is the tough opponents. Specifically, I look at the 49ers. I look at the Texans in week 2 and week 3. Other tough opponents. Potentially the Falcons in week 14. Those are the big guys. The Colts, we don't really know how Anthony Richardson's going to go in year 2 after his injury. But those are the big ones. Those are the big, tough games. But all of those games are at home. The Minnesota Vikings beat the 49ers at home last year without Justin Jefferson. They play the Texans at home. They are going to be one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl. They're going to be picked by everybody because of what they added this offseason and Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs with C.J. Stroud entering his second year. But you can't put past this idea of a second-year setback for C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans. So the fact that this is a home game gives the Minnesota Vikings a chance. You know, if you're on the road against the 49ers and if you're on the road against the Texans, screw it. Just mark down an L on that schedule. Now they have a chance. So that stands out to me. So the tough games aren't as tough as they could be. And then I look at some of the easier games. You got at the Titans, at the Jaguars. Those games aren't as easy because they are road games. Okay? The Tennessee Titans, nobody's afraid of them to start the season. they're not a legit team that has a chance to make the playoffs. The Jaguars, they had an epic collapse at the end of last year. So who knows how they're going to respond this year. But that's definitely a winnable game. In fact, I would mark it down right now. If it was a home game, it would be a win for the Minnesota Vikings. But those two are road games. So what stands out to me is that the home games are against very, very good opponents that would definitely be losses. There's a couple of those games that would definitely be losses if they were on the road. So the tough opponents aren't as tough because they're at home. And the easier opponents that the Minnesota Vikings face in this 2024 leaked schedule are tougher because they're on the road. So, quick glance at the schedule. Giants, that's a kind of a pick'em game. The 49ers and Texans, I hope the Minnesota Vikings just get one of those wins. You lose at the Packers probably, and then the Jets, that's probably a pick'em game too because you don't really know how Aaron Rodgers is going to fare in his first full game or season with the New York Jets. Home versus the Lions, you hope you can sneak one win against the Lions. I mean, honestly, a 3-3 record in the division this year would be pretty good. The Packers, it seems like they're getting better. The Lions just signed Goff to that long contract. Seems like they're getting better. And no doubt the Chicago Bears have gotten better with all of their additions this offseason with Keenan Allen, Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze. And, at the end of last year, their defense was top 10 at the end of the season. So you split the division games. That's 3-3. And then, you try to beat the Giants, try to go 4-3. 49ers and Texans, that's a split. 5-4. Jets, that's probably a loss if I had to bet on it. That's 5-5. At the Rams, again, that's another game that would be a lot easier if it was home. But it's on the road, and it's on a Thursday night. So that's a huge disadvantage for the Minnesota Vikings. So I'll say the Minnesota Vikings are 5-6 after the Rams game. And of course, I already have them at 3-3 with the division game, so I'm skipping those. Versus the Colts at home, I'll say that's a win. So 6-6 for the Minnesota Vikings. At the Jaguars and at the Titans, I'll say that's a split. So 7-7 after those games. Home versus the Cardinals, I'll say that's a win for the Minnesota Vikings, 8-7. Home versus the Falcons, I'll say that's a loss. That's 8-8. Home versus the Bears, I already have that in the 8-8 baked-in schedule. And then at the Seahawks, road game. Seahawks, they have a lot of unknowns too, so a lot of that is going to come down to how serious the Seahawks are in their tough division with the San Francisco 49ers and the Los Angeles Rams. So that game's going to really come down to how the Seahawks play. So at that point, if the Minnesota Vikings split their division games, and honestly, that's best case scenario. Splitting their division games is best case scenario. And then if they're 8-8 going into that Seahawks game, I'll probably mark that down as a loss, 8-9. So my theory is that you take the schedule, you take your predictions, and you always count one more loss than you anticipate because the Minnesota Vikings are going to lose one more game than you think they're going to. Than you think. So I have them at 8-9 at the end of this, which means I have them at 7-10. Just a first quick reaction to what I think the Minnesota Vikings are going to do in 2024. So that's the league schedule. Thank you for making this podcast part of your day. Check out Hokeland Farm 952-491-1541 for the best rotationally grazed meat around. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of the Minnesota Tim Podcast.